Welcome to the Be Dadly podcast, where we discuss all things dadly, from being an entrepreneur while caring for toddlers to raising screenagers and talking the birds and the bees. We're here to help you traverse the vast and dynamic landscape of fatherhood. Enjoy practical advice, lots of puns, and even a few heart-touching moments.
And the dad jokes are pretty good too.
And now your host, Brandon Jones.
And just like that, we are back, folks. This is Brandon Jones, your host for the Be Dadly podcast. I am here with Brian today. Brian is a coach, and he's going to be a really special guest. We're going to get into some juicy stuff for you guys. And Brian, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Brandon. Great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about who you are. Like, what do you do? You know, who you are. Kind of give us a little bit of background on you.
Yeah, well, it depends on where we want to begin, but I'll start with where I am right now, and we'll kind of go backwards. So I do coaching as well. We were talking about we both do coaching, and the thing I find really interesting about coaching is that for me, if I start in one area, like let's say someone's business, then what's holding them back in their business? With their relationship with their wife, their relationship with their children, their relationship with money. So you end up being basically what people call a life coach. You know, I really address the holistic area of someone's life. You know, so there's business, there's the relationship, family, community, physical, self, emotional, mental, spiritual. Spiritual for me is really the foundation of it all. And by spiritual, really what I mean is like just the deepest questions of life, you know, like who am I really? Why am I here? What is my purpose for being here? I think of those as kind of like the root of the tree, the foundation of the all these branches are like these other components, and then that's the foundation that allows these other components of our lives to flower and to bloom. So, and then home, where you live. I think those are the key ones, you know, so just really that holistic approach to like supporting people to really live the life of their dreams and you know, love their life and be who they really are and express that in the world is really the core of what feel like I'm here to do to support people.
That's awesome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's funny. A mentor of mine used to say that business growth is autobiographical. And he would say that as you grow, as too does your business. Mm. And even, you know, there's a great book. It's called, I think it was the 5, you know what? I can't remember it now. 5, not laws.
It's always 5 or 7 or.
Right. Exactly. Or is the 5th discipline? Is it the 5th discipline? Something like that. Anyways, in the book, they talk about how growing organizations are learning organizations, and their growth is dependent on their people learning and growing and developing.
That's awesome.
And so, like, you know, all around, like you said, if you want to grow in your business, you actually have to grow personally, because there's some personal thing in your life that's actually holding you back.
I think that what's interesting about that, I totally agree with that. I think what's interesting about that is you can kind of get to a point where you have a good community of with your business, and then you're growing. So now you're kind of like going into something a little bit, you know, whatever it is, you're into some different, and there's kind of a fear of like, oh, but if I go there, then I might lose some of these people that are, you know, if I go here, I might lose the people that are here.
Right.
You know, for people that are listening, this is audio and video, right?
Yeah.
So if I elevate myself, I might lose people that where I'm currently at. And then people can stay stuck.
Now, is that a conscious thought? Do you think they consciously know that, look, there's some feeling that I'm feeling that if I elevate myself, I'm going to leave behind? Because people want to elevate themselves. Are they consciously aware that they may have the fear of losing people? Yeah,
I think that they are aware, and there's a sense of like, yeah, there's a fear because, oh, I don't want to lose what I have, that kind of a thing. So even though it's not really authentic to me anymore, you know, but then that lack of authenticity starts to get you can start to feel it, and like, oh, this guy's not really, you know, this doesn't. So I think that it can be scary to continue to grow and to evolve and to you know, to think that you may lose some people that can't grow with you and evolve with you, but then you attract people that are on this new next level of elevation with you. I think the people that, you know, maintain success over an extended period of time, they're doing that, you know.
So they're letting go of those things that are no longer serving them, breaking through those obstacles that have been holding them back, and being willing to say, hey, I'm going to elevate myself, and whatever I'm shedding right now is no longer really here to serve me.
You can think of it like a good example, like musicians. You know, we're talking about musicians. So I think of like Bob Dylan, for example. He was playing acoustic, and you know, people really liked it. He had a huge following, doing well, and something inside him was like, I want to play electric. You know, and some people were pissed and like, oh, no, you're supposed to only play acoustic. You're not supposed to play electric. And he's like, well, this is what I want to do, you know? Right. Then his following and eventually expanded more. But there was this kind of like, no, you're supposed to stay where you are and not. So you see this in all these different fields.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, like so I've been on my personal growth journey, and if you go back home to your family, they all see you as the same individual that you were, right? Not necessarily who you are. Today. And it can be really easy, even for you, or for myself rather, I should say, to slide right back into my old habits. Even my accent, I remember going back home, and my partner at the time was like, what? I didn't know you talked like that. And I'm like, I don't usually talk like that. When I get around my family, all of a sudden, the country twang comes back out in me. So it's kind of funny. So it's kind of, that's kind of a micro version of what could be happening on a bigger scale, where it's like you're comfortable with your family, your friends, your situation, and you want to grow. And there's this tension between who you're becoming and who you are, and the safety that you have, and the unknown, essentially, of where you're going.
Yeah, that's 100% right. So I think what it comes down to is having friends, relationships, community that's dedicated to growth, you know? And I think that, because I do find there's a thing where that happens, and I find it I had a session with a guy this morning that, this happens where your family, they may mean well, they may not mean well, but they may mean well, but they're holding you back. They don't want to see you grow. They don't want to see you evolve. They don't want to see you make more money. They don't want to see you be happy because they're not happy. And they feel like they're going to lose you if you become more happy, and unhealthy, even, relationships, dating dynamics, this happens too, of like you trying to hold the other person down because you feel you'll lose them if they elevate their lives, So I think, and we'll inevitably encounter those kind of people to some degree, people that want us to stay small. So I think always starting with ourselves, and then having that community of friends and people in our lives that are like, like take it to the next level, grow, evolve, expand. And, I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I mentioned that mentor, you say business growth is autobiographical. One thing he also said that is coming up for me right now is he'd say, transformation by nature is disruptive. And you think about how if a person goes through a transformation, like say, for example, you wanted to lose weight, your schedule changes, your hobbies change, what you do with your time changes. If you have friends that are really used to you coming over and drinking on Friday night, and you're like, hey, I'm not drinking, that changes. It really changes everything. There's like this huge shift, this disruption that exists. And if you don't have a supportive community, if you don't have people that are like, they welcome that kind of transformation, I could see how that can easily hold you back. Your best buds become some trigger for you in some way. So you're a coach, and tell me a little bit about how did you get to that journey? I mean, what led you to becoming a coach?
It's an interesting journey. I was 20 years old. I came down with chronic fatigue syndrome, and it lasted actually for years. And for a while, I was like totally debilitated for about like 6 months or so. And it gradually got like a little bit better and better. It really just kind of threw me for a loop, as far as like where I thought my life was going, what was happening. It was very intense for a while. And going to see doctors, they didn't have an answer for what was happening for me. It was kind of like, oh, well, maybe it's this, and try these drugs, and maybe it's that, and try these drugs. And so I was like, geez, these guys, they're just kind of making stuff up. They don't really know what's
shooting in the dark.
Yeah. And then just promoting some drug, So I just realized I had to discover for myself what was happening for me. And it was kind of like of necessity, And so that led me into a deeper inquiry into why am I suffering, but why is humanity suffering? You know, what's happening? Like, is there a way out of this? Is there a way through this?
So you're kind of like, am I sick or is the system sick? Is that was kind of going on?
I was definitely sick, but like I realized that like what was happening for me could be beneficial. It was kind of like a collective thing, collective consciousness.
Yeah.
It could be beneficial for other people too.
Right. So you're starting to have this awareness like, hey, if I'm going through this and I just experienced this with the medicine world and they're kind of throwing these shots in the dark, maybe there are other people out there that are also a little bit lost in their medical journey or in their healing journey.
Yeah. So it was, this gets to the next part. So it was physical and medical, but it's also psychological. It's also mental. It's also emotional. It's also spiritual. So that was kind of like the first thing I started to realize was like, I was kind of, you know, quite ignorant at the time. I didn't really know much. I never really delved into life too deeply at that point, right? So this really started me to delve deeper. And one of the first things I realized was the mind-body connection. You know, that what we're thinking and feeling affects ourselves physically. What we're feeling physically affects ourselves mentally and emotionally. So that was a huge opening for me. So that kind of got me into the whole realm of consciousness and psychology and, you know, emotional intelligence and how the way we look at things and the way we perceive things affects the way we experience things. So that whole world opened up for me. I also started to get into Eastern spirituality, started to get into yoga, started to get into meditation, you know, Zen, Taoism, all of these like different Indian spiritual teachers. And all of that really opened up this whole universe for me of just, and the exploration was just around suffering. Like, why am I suffering? Again, why are we all suffering? You know, why is humanity been suffering? What is this human condition? And so that was I was basically like a spiritual seeker, you know, for years. And the interesting thing about being sick was I couldn't really do much. And for the beginning, I was just sort of like in bed most of the day.
Wow.
And so what I could do was read. So I started just reading books all the time, you know, getting all these books. And at that time it was the library, you know, getting all these books and reading these different things. And I was, basically it freed me up to be like just like a full-time spiritual seeker for a while. And just on that path and just, you know, kind of inquiring these deepest questions. And, you know, over time, it wasn't like this giant explosion, you know, but it was like, there were some little explosions at points, but it was a gradual. It was gradual. Over time, just started to get more clear, started to like feel like I had more of an understanding of who I am and why I'm here. And then people would kind of like, I would just be in conversations. I noticed people were kind of like coming to me for advice, and what I was saying seemed to be like valuable. Oh, they seemed to be benefiting from what I'm saying. And then there was a sense of, well, this is what I'm really called to do. This is what I really called to do. At the time, I was just working like part-time jobs and these different things, and I was like, and I was kind of detesting it more and more, you know. And so I was like, you know. There was like kind of this split happening to me, this division of like, this is what I feel like I'm really called to do, but like, I don't know how to do it. You know, what am I supposed to do?
How old are you at this time?
Yeah, good question. So at this time, so the journey, so it's an interesting question because like this all started at 20.
Right.
So now I'm like 31.
Now, are you still sick?
I'm better. At this point, I'm working part-time. You know, there was still like in the like late 20s, I would get relapses. So I'd be going pretty well, and then all of a sudden, like, get a relapse, and then I'm out for a couple of weeks.
Now, did it come on sudden when this was when you're 20 years old? Is like all of a sudden overnight you're like, I don't feel like moving?
It was like a sinus infection.
And so it started as sinus infection, like you're sick,
yeah, you're
and then
sick.
just stuck with you.
Something that would last for like maybe a few days normally.
Right, and all of a sudden you just have no energy.
But it just kept going.
Gosh.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I have a friend and a few friends that had Lyme disease, and they were told they had chronic fatigue syndrome. Then it was fibromyalgia. Then it just kind of went on. And actually, when it got worse because of some antibiotics that they were on for like quite a while, basically inoculated their gut.
Yeah.
They were told they may have MS because they were like not even able to walk very well. Their brain function was really off, and it was actually related to a really, really, really heavy dose of antibiotics that they were trying to kill whatever infection it was. And unfortunately, they actually ended up causing more harm than good. So you're 20, so you have the sinus infection. It really slows you down. It sticks with you. You start trying to figure it out medically. It's not working. And then you start saying, well, what can I do right now? You're picking up books. You're opening your mind up to this spiritual space that, hey, the body, the mind, this energetic body, there's a spiritual body, there's all these other parts that are all connected. And you start exploring that more. And as you explore that more, you start finding yourself on a healing path.
Yeah. And the other thing that's important to mention is I started to realize that I needed to make lifestyle changes. So there's a real practical element here as well. So
this is diet, stuff like that, drinking more water, whatever.
Yeah. I started to explore all these different, what are considered alternative. Most of them are very ancient, alternative healthcare.
They used to be the
practices.
norm.
Yeah.
Now they're the odd one out. But it's totally normal
so
now to eat food that
ancient
looks like,
healthcare practices.
Yeah, it's totally normal now to eat food that looks like it came from outer space. Like, you think about it, if you were to show a caveman like a bag of Oreos, they'd be like, what is that?
And they'd probably get immediately sick eating it.
Well, that too. Yeah, exactly. We've become, I think it's, I use this one a lot. It's Krishnamurti said.
He was a huge influence for me, Krishnamurti.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah. He says, no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Right.
One of my favorite quotes by him. So, okay, so now you're in your early 30s and and you're having a calling, which is kind of like, think what happens right around that 30-year mark. Mm-hmm. You're saying, hey, I've done these odd jobs. They are obviously not calling me in the way that me being someone who's a confidant or someone I can get that's giving advice feels way more authentic to me, and I'm going to pursue that. And so then you get on that journey.
Well, I think the important thing to share there is that there was like, I guess a fear, right, of doing it. Like kind of like we talked earlier about that growth point, and
was it like imposter syndrome?
No,
was it kind of like who am I?
That's an interesting thing too, because I think that it was just like, what do I do? How do I do it?
Yeah, so in
the people that I work with, I come across this of like, well, I don't know how to do it, Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, well, nobody knows how to do it initially.
Totally.
You just got to do it.
Yeah, you got to fail forward.
Yeah. Now, some people, it's very dramatic, and some people, again, it can be a gradual thing, depending on your situation. If you do have kids, small kids, then generally you won't do anything too crazy, But in my case, in my situation, what happened for me, and it's different for everybody, but what happened for me was I remember this very clear moment where I'm like, I went outside and I'm walking in the rain, I'm just like walking, almost through the entire night, just like walking. And I'm just like, I just can't do this anymore. Like something needs to change. I can't do it anymore.
Wait, was this an analogy, or you're saying you were?
No, this was for real.
So you were for real walking through the whole night, and you're and it's raining. So there's this emotional experience that you're having where I can't do this anymore. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So that's a very big moment, like a pivotal moment.
It's like I have to align my purpose and the deepest call of my heart and my passion and what I love and what I feel like I'm here to do to be a benefit to others with how I generate income. That was kind of
regardless of the fear I have, regardless of any hesitation, I have to do this.
Yeah.
Wow. Sounds cinematic.
Yes. Cinematic. Maybe be in a book someday.
Yeah.
So then the next day I go into my job and I say, I'm going to resign. I gave 3 weeks notice. And also the place I was living, I didn't really feel was right for me either. So I told them the same thing.
Wow.
Yeah. 3 weeks notice. And then.
Are you a father at this point?
I am. That's a whole other issue so we can get into too.
Yeah. We'll get into that right after this. So you're leaving the comfort zone. The shores of comfort are being, you're even burning it sounds like you're burning the boats a little bit too.
To bring my son into it. So, his mother and I had separated, about, a year before this point. just really wanting to go two very different paths. And it just kind of became clear that it was, instead of kind of this, tug of war, that it was better just to go those different paths.
When you say different, are you meaning like she went the Oreo path and you went like organic path? Like what? Or
yeah,
was it?
I would say that was a part of it. Yeah.
So just very different lifestyle
I
choices.
think that what I was already feeling even at that time was like, hey, I had this path that I want to follow. That's, it was basically an entrepreneurial path. It was also, an organic path. I think her path was more kind of mainstream comfort.
So you were kind of going this spiritual, organic, and entrepreneurial path that was maybe a bit more wild and even maybe more risky. She was playing it safe, staying a conventional route. And so that division, you were like, no, I have to grow into this.
I think it was safe to say too that I was kind of at that period, it was kind of a little bit of a hippie phase as well.
Or did you have the long hair?
I think that term we could use. I did have grew out the hair. Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, where are you at? Where do you live?
I'm in, at this moment, I'm in Arcata, California, which is the far north, Humboldt County, almost on the coast, almost close to like Oregon.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
The perfect place.
To be doing That's
this.
where I wanted to be. That's why I went there intentionally. That's where I wanted to live at that moment.
Yeah. So that's that's like a home for that kind of energy. For her energy, that might not feel so comfortable.
It wasn't the right place for her.
Was she ready to leave?
She wasn't there. We had already split. So she had moved back to so at this point we're on two different coasts. She had moved back to where we grew up in Pennsylvania, or Reading, Pennsylvania area. Kind
of the thing that you were shedding, that part. So, wow. Okay. And so that had to have been tough. How old
that was definitely tough.
How old was your child?
It was tough, but it was necessary. That's the thing. It's I don't think it could have happened any differently than it did.
How old is your son at this time?
Like when we split, he was 3.5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is tough. How long did that period go for?
Somewhere between a year and 2 years.
And at that time, you're kind of having to grow into something new, right?
Yeah.
Mom is going back for shelter or her own safe shores, kind of what we talked about before.
Correct.
Back to the things that will help her feel her safety.
Correct.
It wasn't physical safety or anything. It was more like an emotional, psychological, like, hey, it's safer for me where I'm familiar.
She actually initially went back to live with her mother.
So that's, so really back to familiarity. It's like, hey, I tried that whole coast thing. I've got this baby. It's so many things are new. I just need something familiar. And for you, you're like, my soul, my quest is like just beginning. It's really a very important thing that I blossom in this way. Otherwise, I literally will die. Some part of me will die.
So I think an important lesson here to bring this into fatherhood is you as a father, I think you really have to be living your best life. Like, don't feel like, oh, I have to compromise my life because of this kid, and I wish I could do what I want, but I can't because of this kid. Because then you project that resentment onto them, and you create this kind of, which is not their fault. Anything that you're feeling, it's nothing to do, So I think that happens a lot where people feel like, because I had this kid, I can't do what I want,
right. And then there's this tinge of like you holding that over the child, like for the rest of, you're like, I sacrificed.
That's what I'm saying.
Myself.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So you're basically saying, like, if you're caught in that moment where you're like, will I regret going for what I want and then, and feeling bad about maybe having a separation, or maybe having this little period of time where things are different. Will I feel bad about that? Or will I feel better if I stay exactly where I'm comfortable and I don't go through this transition? You're saying go for it. You will feel a lot less regret.
you start having this resentment build, and it's like, oh, my life sucks because of you, the kid. But it's not because of the kid. It's because of you.
It's because of your own fear. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important thing for parents, is like, if you are living, which is not easy. Like most people aren't doing this, but if you can really live a life that like you're really happy and you're really fulfilled and you really feel like you're on purpose, and let's just keep it simple and say if you're really happy, let's keep it like, let's just with that. If you're really happy, then you are modeling for your child how to live a happy life, how to live a fulfilling, whatever we're doing, right? We're modeling for the child.
Yeah. 100%.
So I think it's the best thing we could do as a parent is really be living on purpose and really to the best. Of course, there's moments where things comes up and there's challenges. I'm not saying every single second you're blissed out, but like
right.
To be generally happy and fulfilled and living your purpose and inspired. I think that's the best thing you can do for your children, and find a way to do that for yourself.
Yeah, this morning I was reading, and one of the things that it was talking about, one of the headlines was "Happy You, Happy Them," and then the short. It wasn't a chapter at all. It was just it was just a small section in the book, but it was saying basically like your children feel safe and secure. Your children feel well and whole when you are happy. So you have to find those ways to make sure you're happy. And that's imperative, right? This is a part of their experience too. If dad feels overwhelmed, if dad feels like he's shut himself down, if dad feels like he's turning off a part of himself, then the children are going to feel that. And part of them is going to be maybe compensating, maybe trying to adjust or make their own changes, but it's all based on like you not being happy. Right?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is common for, unfortunately, is common for dads is kind of they relay this message to kids of like, oh, that's not possible, or stop dreaming, or get realistic, get real, because they've squashed their own dreams, So then they
project that on,
relay that to the child, yeah,
right,
and then the child has this kind of thing of like anytime they try to dream big, the dad's like, oh, get realistic. That's not, it's not possible, because it wasn't possible for them, right? Because they squashed their own dreams.
Yeah, I try to keep that in mind with my children for sure, because I remember back in, go way back when, kindergarten for me, Nintendo had just come out around kindergarten. That was like the brand new console or whatever. And then get into like 5th grade. I remember lots of kids were playing video games. I remember people being like, they'd say, what do you want to be when you're older? And the kid would be like, I just want to play video games. And be like, well, that's not a career. You can never do that. And today kids are making like crazy amounts of
millions
money.
Of dollars.
Literally millions. Literally, they're millionaires playing video games. So when we say to our children, that doesn't, whatever those things are, we are literally, we're not allowing them to see into a future that is possible. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not true. For example, I remember the first time I saw a picture-in-picture, that was a big deal. You could see 2 screens on your screen. And I saw it at a friend's house, and I came home and I told my mom. She got really mad at me. She actually thought I was lying to her and that I was making this thing up. And I'm like, Mom, it was crazy. You could see 2 channels at once. And my mom was like, fibbing is this and that. And then eventually she saw picture-in-picture, and she like came over to me and hugged me. And she goes, I am so sorry. I totally thought that you were making something up. And I'm like, this is what I was talking about. So I try to keep that in mind. My son, these kids have ideas. They're wild ideas. They have things that they want to do. And I'm like, I'm not going to say that's not possible, because everything I've seen has told me that almost everything is possible. So we got to be careful with stifling their creativity and their pursuit as well. So yeah, I think that's really good.
Yeah, I think that's a great, just that alone as a dad is a great thing. If you can just, especially when, that kind of, I think of like kind of a magical age, like 4, 5, 3, maybe 6, like in that age. And they're really just like all kinds of magical, wild ideas they have, at that point. And, it's just to allow them to dream, allow them to dream and to be in a field of anything's possible. Yeah. With your children.
When were you guys able to reconnect?
Yeah, soon after. Once I made this decision that I was going to leave, then there was several different stages, but basically I came back to the East Coast, and she moved to North Carolina. I moved to North Carolina. There was a bunch of different stages, but basically I felt very close to my son from that point forward. And this is probably a good message for dads too, because I know a lot of dads are not with the mother of their child. For me, that was my case from that point forward. But I just really, I feel like the time I was with him, I was super present. It was like I wasn't like distracted by anything else. So we had this really quality time together, and I think we just had a very deep relationship, that developed over time through being really present.
Did he move in with you, or what was the living situation?
He was with me in the summers. His mom and I had a pretty good level of communication at that point, so it was pretty free as far as like, so summers was for sure my time and holidays, but then there were other times throughout the year too where I would spend time with them and connect with them as well. Mm-hmm. And then as he gets older, we're spending a lot of time also phone, FaceTime, talking on the phone, connecting.
Yeah. And when you and her, you said that you guys, the communication was high. Was she up-leveling herself at this time? Was she in her own personal growth journey? And so you guys are starting to be able to communicate better? Like how did it go from, she needs to go back, you're going to do your thing, and then you guys make this kind of healing journey?
She knows that he needs a father in his life, right, and so she knows that he wants to share time with me. I know he needs a mother in his life, and he wants to share time with her. So, it's really like, I think if you really care about your child and love your child, then you want to have a cordial relationship with, the mother or the father, as the case may be.
Yeah, I remember telling my first son is 16, his mother and I were never together in any significant way. I mean, it's kind of one of those like 3-week fling kind of things that ended up, producing a child. And so then there was a point when he was younger, and I felt like she had some, how can I say it? I felt like she was ashamed in some ways about things that had gone on. Now he had to come live with me. She'd lost custody, and she kind of didn't feel good about it. And then there were times where when he was going to visit, there was some animosity that wasn't necessary. And I remember writing her and saying, hey, just so you know, I did not see you as an enemy. Like I don't think of you as a bad person, an enemy, or anything like that. In fact, quite the opposite. Like, you're my son's mother, and we are on the same team. And the way that I see us win or score a goal or whatever, however you want to say it, using this analogy, is if our son is happy, healthy, and feels loved. If he feels those things, then we are winning. And so I'm on your team. I want to do whatever we can to make sure he feels that the same from you and from me. And just that's where I'm coming from here. She did appreciate the message, but we never really, her and I weren't ever able to really completely get on the same team, which is unfortunate. Even though that's been my intention for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's well said. I mean, you want to, do your best just to have, you don't have to be like best buddies, or obviously there's a reason why you're not together. Right. So in my case, there's definitely a lot of reasons, but just try to have, with your son or daughter in mind, just having that awareness that because that person's going to be in your life the rest of your life. Totally. Right? Totally. Right? You're bonded to that person in some way the rest of your life, whatever kind of weddings or things that are going on, they're going to be there. So just I think just having that intention, if you care about your child, to be cordial and have communication, even if you're not super close, so you don't have a lot in common with that, with the mother, father, is important.
Yeah, I definitely found that it's kind of like you're doing your child a disservice by being hard on the mother, or talking down to the mother, or talking poorly about the mother. Like, and the reason I know this from firsthand experience. So my father made some poor choices when it came to the way that he would talk about my mother. My mother didn't do such a good job either. They're both aware of that today, and have kind of like been, okay, we're sorry about how we handled that. But they didn't break up in a great way. They didn't love the way that their relationship ended. And so there was some animosity, and my father was very bitter about my mother. And my mother was kind of like, your dad is a loser kind of talk. And then my dad was kind of like, your mom wouldn't know a loser from anyone. She's a cheater. And it was like really bad. And we were kind of stuck in between. And I remember at times, many times feeling like I needed to defend my mother, or feeling like I needed to defend my father. And what's awful about that is that inside of us, we know that we came from these two people.
Came from both of them.
So when they're shaming that one, a part of us is being shamed. Right. There's and unfortunately, the other thing too, that I've learned even just through my own personal development journey is that what we dislike in others is the part of us we most want to deny or denounce. Right. So whenever my dad, for example, really disliked my mother's choices when it came to her, like, for example, just her choices in men. So when he saw her get with other men, he really disliked that. Well, that same sexual nature was in my father. My father married multiple times. He was always, your mother's going to marry, 100 times, whatever. And then my father married multiple times. Like, well, that's something you don't like also in yourself. You wish that wasn't true, but that's also a part of you. And then with my mother, she didn't necessarily like certain aspects about my father. And that's also a part of her that she doesn't necessarily like. And so, yeah, it's really interesting, but we've got to be very careful with our children that we're not including them in that mix, because it's a very unhealthy experience for the child. I know that, like I said, I know that firsthand. And
I think that's why there are definitely cases where it's better for the child for the parents to separate. I know we have people have this idea of like, oh, staying together is better. It is better for the kids if it's a healthy relationship.
Right.
If it's not a healthy relationship, it's not better for the kids. They don't need to be exposed to that. Yeah. Sometimes there's just two people that they have two different ways that they want to go in their life, and just how people grow over time and they change, like we're talking about. Sometimes you grow and change into two different paths. And I think you'll have a better relationship with them if you honor that difference, and it'd be better for the child too. Yeah,
I'm going to be vulnerable here. I've definitely, again, experienced that firsthand. My son's mother and I are like oil and water. Her family used to nickname us the Bickersums, which ironically was their nickname. Her mother and father that was their nickname, and they kind of dubbed that on us because we're just bickering all the time about every little thing. And then, then we had this child, and it got to a point where it was like, I've got resentment. She's got resentment. We're not happy with one another. And we're, arguing over these little things. And it's like, gosh, this is a really hard decision to make, but I think we'd be best in just two different houses, like parenting together, but not being together. And that is a very difficult and challenging choice. But I think I agree with you. I think sometimes it's necessary. I think we'd be happier. The child would be happier and healthier if we made that choice. And I feel like that is a tough place to be. But sometimes we have to make that. Yeah. And there is a thing for my son, and I've heard this from other children that have grown up in this kind of dynamic with their parents being separated or parents being divorced. There is something powerful in it that you get these two different contrasting environments that you live in, and I think it can make a child kind of like more well-rounded, or I'm not sure what the word is, but kind of more expanded in their consciousness. Absolutely, yeah. It's like the idea of the map is not the territory, which is a great idea or a great concept. If you think about it, like when you look at a Google map, right, and it shows you the roads, it doesn't necessarily show you the trees and all the details in the hills and all of those things. And a lot of times when we map our world, our map looks like Google Maps, not necessarily the Google Earth, right? So it doesn't really have that satellite, all that texture and stuff. But when you bring more things in, more other elements, other layers, you can add layers like the satellite imaging kind of thing. And even with our life, the map is not the territory is an idea around neurolinguistic programming, but the idea is that if you bring more color and context, you actually get more of a vibrant or like a rich experience of like what the meaning and the purpose and all of the things that are happening, the elements, the players that are, in play, and how all of that works. And so I can totally see how that would be the case. Like 2 different households are going to show you 2 different ways to live, 2 different ways to keep things clean, 2 different ways. And maybe there is a lot of similarities. There's going to be overlap, but there's also going to be contrast. So yeah, I could totally see how that would bring a lot of different depths to their meaning and their experience rather.
And the more contrast we have in our lives, the more we get clear on what's right for us, what we like, what we want to do. It's kind of like, if you've only lived or if you've only been to one place your entire life, you don't have much to draw from. If you've been to 2 places, you have twice as much. If you've been to 4 or 6 or 50, you just expanding your consciousness more and more. So I think that was a benefit for my son, is he got to experience more contrast and experience different, because we had different places we lived at different times, and so he got to experience these different situations that I think gave him a wider understanding of the world.
Yeah, I like to joke. Personally, I've lived in so many states and so many different cities that I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of like a rental car where I don't have a lot of years. I just have a ton of miles, and then my mother, she did end up marrying like 6 or 7 times. I think I stopped counting at some point. And my father married 3 times. So I had different step parents and even sometimes step siblings. And even with those also came step grandparents. So I had like all these different characters. And looking back, I have a very optimistic perspective on my life. Like I'm naturally optimistic.
Yeah.
So I saw it as like, oh, I got to experience all these different things, all these different people. Although some people have a more cynical or pessimistic perspective of life, and they kind of go, I didn't have stability. And I think there's a part there, right? Like where we kind of we're choosing the narrative to use in our life. Like we have some element of choice of whether we saw that as 100%. Lack of stability or, a problem, or we saw it as an empowering thing. Right.
That's a huge part of my work is like what's the story? I think a lot of people don't even realize that they're creating the story. Right. They think, well, that's just how it is. That's just reality. And it's like, no, but what's your story about what happened? And being able to consciously construct the story of your life allows you to just have a deeper level of empowerment and responsibility and creativity and live from that deepest sense of truth in yourself. I think that's huge. Yeah, being able to story construction of your life and the world around you and
Yeah, because I mean, it is easy, right, to see the glass is half empty, right? They say, which is true. Like you can look at it, you can point to all the evidence, you can build up a whole stack of evidence that glass is absolutely half empty, and that is 100% true. Nobody could argue with you on that. And that glass also is half full, and you get to decide which side of the aisle you're going to stand on. Are you going to argue for its fullness, or are you going to argue for the emptiness? Sometimes there's a benefit in knowing both, right? Probably more than sometimes, but okay, so that's part of your work. You're helping people develop a better narrative for their journey, so they can use it from a more empowered place. You started doing that somewhere in your early 30s,
correct?
And how did you end up turning that into your profession? Because you were talking about you were kind of getting there, that it was a little bit of
Well, the imposter syndrome was interesting because I think initially you do have to be an imposter.
Right.
It's actually
not
important.
Like faking it.
You have to start to be an imposter. No, but like I basically created these business cards, and I said life coach. I told people I was a life coach. And I started doing sessions with people. I started doing them initially for free. And so that was kind of like my school. I'm learning doing these sessions. And a lot of people, I was actually kind of overwhelmed by the response. A lot of people were, they wanted to do these free sessions. I think it was like 3 months, something like that. So I learned how to like basically be a coach and work with people through just doing it and doing it for a while. And then initially, asked for money, and that was a whole other learning curve. And just, little by little, step by step, just evolved. And, I remember like the first workshop that I did right after I left Arcata was in Sacramento, California. And there was like a living room, maybe like 3 or 4 people in there. You know, I'm just talking to these 3 or 4 people, and maybe they gave me like $5 or $10 each when it was, you know, it was a starting point.
Right.
And I think that's the key for people, is to start wherever you are, and just you know, commit to it and just take it one day at a time, one step at a time, and it grows and it evolves.
I mean,
over time.
It's like the old adage that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step.
Yeah.
It's like if you're really going to travel that far, you got to start walking.
Yeah. And you got to start where you are.
Right.
You know, people get in their heads of like, well, I want it to be, well, okay, but that's not where you are right now. And just start where you are and just, take the next step and the next step and the next step. So it was it's like, if you can, I think you have to be able to embrace the unknown and embrace uncertainty to some degree in this life, or maybe to a lot of a degree sometimes. And if you can do that, it's a fun ride, you know?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. Have you read that book?
Yeah, Michael Singer.
He's got a couple other books.
We did a retreat in Gainesville, Florida.
At his place.
Yeah, well, he was a part of the retreat. He
Was it at he has like a center in Florida, doesn't he?
Yeah, so we did a retreat that was not at his place, but then for part of it, we went to his place.
Cool.
And he spoke to our group, and so we got to meet him in person.
He is a really interesting and fascinating character.
Yeah.
If you've never read the book, The Surrender Experiment, the short version of it is this. This man is definitely going the traditional route, and then eventually starts kind of like contemplating, how much control does he have essentially of what happens? And all of us kind of, I feel like, can get to a place where we realize, how much control do you really have? Does this last 5 years look like what you thought it was going to look like? What about the next 5?
Definitely not.
Do you think that they're going to look like what you believe they're going to look like, right? And could they be better? That's a good part also to ask yourself is, okay, they might not look like what I think, but could they be better than I think, right? Which is what has happened to me many times over is, man, the 5 years, those are actually better than I thought they could be. So he says, look, I don't know that I have much control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to surrender as an experiment to see what happens. And then he starts surrendering to what he's surrendering to is this nudge that he's getting. He's practicing meditation. And when he gets a nudge that he should do something, he listens to it. So if he feels like, I really need to do X, Y, and Z, like he doesn't ignore it. He doesn't keep putting it under the table. He doesn't keep pushing it off. He literally says, when I get that nudge, I am going to listen. Well, that leads him to like going to Mexico and going to all these places.
And not always understanding why with the mind.
Yeah. And he's like, I don't really even know why I'm going and doing this or what's going to happen or where I'm going, where it's going to lead me.
Yeah.
And it leads him to this absolutely insane life. Like when you read it, you're like, this is fictional. It's like, there's no way that this is a real life story. And then he winds up, making all kinds of money, going and building this spiritual church, marrying a woman that just comes to the land and starts like basically saying like, I'm here to develop the land. And he's like, I don't even know you. How are you, coming to this land and supposed to develop it? And then they like end up, it's wild. It's a wild ride. And trust me, even though I gave you this short version, I didn't ruin the book for you. There are insane twists and interesting things. And it all comes back to this idea of like, should we surrender? That's not to say that he laid back. Because one of the things
it's kind of almost the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah. Like when you think about it, it's like, oh, well, I'll just let life pummel me, or I'll just let life do whatever it wants and I'll just go wherever it wants. It kind of sounds like he's like being kind of lackadaisical about his own will. Yeah. But actually in several instances, he had to surrender to things that were against what he felt naturally. Yep. They took courage. They took his willingness to surrender his safety, to surrender what he believed, would protect him in order to go on this kind of wild adventure. And man, what a life. Like it's a very fascinating book and a very fascinating way of living.
I think you're getting to something that's at the core of like all of this. I had a really great session actually this morning. I was a little bit late leaving for that reason, but it was great. It was so there's this guy I've been working with for like a couple years now, and he's talking to me about like how we were talking about diet actually, but it transcends out to everything else in our lives too. So he's like, I'm just kind of noticing like through being present, like I know what I should eat or not eat now, where before I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't present. I wasn't like listening, you know? And it's like, yeah, there's this thing with diet where like I went through like almost pretty much every kind of diet. You know, like I was vegan, I was vegetarian, I was raw, I was macrobiotic, I was whatever, carnivore, all of it. And now I'm at the point where like I just really listen and be present. And I'm like, oh, my body wants an avocado right now, or a salad, or fish, or whatever it is, you know. And I think that's the way ultimately to live our lives.
But what do you tell the man that's like, I really want a whiskey right now?
I remember, you know, Eckhart Tolle.
Yep.
So someone asked him this question about somebody was a woman was, she's like, I just really like French fries, and like, how do I stop eating French fries?
Yeah.
He goes, I want you to actually, next time you feel like you want to eat the French fries, to actually eat the French fries. Don't try to stop yourself. Just eat them. And when you eat them, really pay attention. Like really pay attention to like how it tastes, how you feel, how your digestion is, how you feel afterwards. You know, is it giving you energy? Is it making you feel tired? You know, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and just really be present. And then when you're really present, then just notice if you want to keep eating them or not. Right. So I think like that's the journey of like, the more we become present, the more we're really there, we start to notice. So this is my client. This is his journey. He's like, I think he was saying he was drinking like a lot of wine at night, and he's like, I'm just noticing I just don't feel good. Like, well, you never felt good, but now you're just noticing it because you're more present.
Yeah, there's actually the quitting smoking book. I forget what the quitting smoking book is, but it's kind of like he basically tells you like smoke just one after another after another,
right.
And keep noticing
yes.
what that smell looks like.
That's the true way.
Yeah, he's like,
that's the true way.
Just keep doing like just like one cigarette after another, and keep noticing, what is this smell? What does this feel?
That's it.
What is this? And then eventually you realize, your brain goes, ugh. This is awful.
Yeah,
but it is difficult to do that with fries, because I've eaten a ton of fries.
But it's like being,
right,
and there could be a time where your guidance is to eat French fries, right? So that's the thing I'm realizing is there's no rules here anymore. It's just like I'm being really present, I'm really listening, and maybe there is a time to have a glass of wine, you know, but it's probably not every day, right? So like you're just being present, and it's like really like a conversation with God. You know, like you're just listening, and we want to get to a place where, like, this is what we were talking about this morning, like God is guiding us, and God is like the universal creative intelligence, I call it, like just this knowing inside. Like God is guiding us every moment, and that's where we want to be. That's ultimately like the place we want to be, and that guidance can be not what we think with our heads or with our minds. It could be like, well, that's not, you know. This is not, I don't understand why I'm supposed to do this. This is the Michael Singer experiment, you know? But if you do it, then you start opening up to this field of like synchronicities and magic and miraculous things happening, which takes life to a whole other level that you can't get to just like thinking it all by yourself, and, you know, just through your head, just through your mind.
Yeah, you're reminding me of the word contemplate, right?
Yeah.
Because you were saying, you know, if you just take the time to kind of tune in and like get like
contemplation, meditation,
contemplating on these things.
Yeah.
And I was remembering I remember one time saw the Webster dictionary, because you said it was kind of like a conversation with God, and there is a definition, like the old definition, and I want to say it's 13th century definition of contemplate was a mystical state of awareness of God's being or something like that. And I'm like, well, that's totally different than what we think of today. We think of contemplation more as like weighing the pros and cons, analyzing. That's what we think of contemplation. It's like, wait quick, you mean that the original definition was like this mystical state of awareness of God's being? Like what? Like you're saying that literally if I get quiet, I can get present with God. Wow, that's it's like, man, we totally ruined that word.
100%. I think there's even there's even a term, contemplative. They used to use that term back in the day. Yeah.
I'm a big contemplation fan. I actually used to run contemplative dialogues in Austin. It's a very great process. And you're right. There's a part of you're having a conversation with God. So if you were to contemplate, for example, fries, or you were to contemplate whiskey, eventually, if you contemplate it with God, God's like, you and I both know that that's not serving you. Like, there's no way. You can try to twist it whichever way you want. It tasted good, whatever, but your arteries are being clogged, your liver's being shot, and there's no way to justify these actions on your body as badly as you want to. And now the choice is up to you. Now you have the awareness, it is what it is. Are you going to make the tough, challenging, and uphill decision to quit these things that are not serving you?
Yeah. And one other thing to that, I'm sure you have this experience too, is just thinking like, oh, I want to stop smoking. I want to stop smoking. These kind of like mantra type things. It doesn't work, because as people that go deeper into this kind of understanding the mind, whatever we're giving our attention to grows. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if you're thinking I want it or I don't want it.
So I started a habit coaching. I created a method. Okay, it's called the switch method, and the switch method it's basically the idea that if I were able to change your belief around something you do, your actions will follow. Okay. Yeah. But too often we try to change our actions without changing our beliefs. So what I mean by that is, like, she believes, for example, you're talking about the French fries, the girl that's talking to Eckhart Tolle. She believes French fries are delicious. They taste great. They satisfy her hunger. They're easy to get.
But there is something in there that wants to stop. So that's interesting.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, this is what happens. There's a conflict. There's an internal conflict that occurs. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes this conflict comes from the outside. For example, all of a sudden you have a life event, right? A car accident, a death. Something happens that goes, whoa, I need to take some of this more seriously. And that life event from the outside causes you to have an internal conflict with your current choices. Yep. Sometimes it's an internal thing where you actually, have maybe like something happens to you, like a physical thing happens to you where you're like, you go to the doctors and they're like, hey, if you don't get off these French fries, you're going to kill yourself, right? And so you're like, oh, I got to change that. And then sometimes there's a calling like you had when you were in your 30s or whatever, where you said, there's a bigger me trying to be expressed here. I need to leave the shores of comfort and become that. And so then that belief that you needed to become something new drove your actions. Those actions followed that belief, right? So because I have kind of gotten to this point where I've come to realize, okay, if actions follow beliefs, right? Then what we need to do is, when a person has become conflicted, is get them to switch into the belief and be able to hold it, sustain it. Because what happens is we oscillate. One instance, it's the thing that happens right when we quit alcohol. I quit alcohol every Sunday, where I was like, I'm done with alcohol for the rest of my life, right? Or, after a Saturday night. But then, of course, Friday comes around and I'm right back into the same routine. So we oscillate, we get unswitched, right? Where the switch goes back to automatic, especially when the comfort zone gets out of there, we switch back into our automatic. Yep. So I call it switch method. And one of the great tools that I use is an I state or a statement that defines the thing at hand. So for example, French fries, right? And you can use is or are. So it would be, for example, if somebody wanted to quit French fries, I would ask them these questions. I'd say, fill in the blank for me. French fries are blank. And they'd be like, delicious. French fries are easy. French fries are cheap. French fries are disgusting. French fries are fattening, right? So then we'd come up with this list. When we got the list out, essentially you'd have this conflicted experience. And actually now your mind's on your paper. And you can see it visually that there is a confliction happening here. One side of this is positive. One side of it is negative. Yeah. And here's where the interesting thing is. When you are changing a negative, the negatives are positive. You know how in math you do a double negative, you get a positive? Yep. The same is the case when you're changing a negative experience in your life. The negatives about that are positive. And what I mean by that is, if I said, for example, that French fries are delicious, Does that statement sound positive or negative?
Positive.
But it's totally taking you in a negative direction because those positives are exactly what keeps the French fries going. Mm-hmm. But the negative statement, French fries are disgusting and fattening, does that sound like a positive statement? No, it sounds awfully negative. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly leading to a positive outcome. So what we have to decide to do is, and the other thing about the brain, before I get to what we decide to do, the other thing about the brain is that the brain wants to avoid things that are negative. And so we have to reframe those. So one of the switches is to say, when I think to myself, French fries are delicious, I need to label that. That is a negative thought. That thought is actually keeping me from living my truest self. That thought is keeping me from health. That is a completely deceptive lie that I will no longer accept in my life, even though a part of me goes, no, well, it's kind of the truth. No, you got to stop that story, because if you feed the story that French fries are delicious, you will end up believing that French fries are more delicious than they are unhealthy, which is not true. So what I would do is I would say, hey, let's adopt the beliefs that are negative that are actually very, very powerful for us. Mm-hmm. So when the person said, man, they are fattening, right? And I say, how much of a punch does that statement have? Because some like, for example, if a person says French fries are cheap, I'm like, okay, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much does that impact you? They're like, not much. I don't really care. Right. But on the scale from 1 to 10, how much does French fries are fattening impact you? They're like, yeah, that one's got more sting to it. It's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So I'd say, okay, that's the one. So I'm going to stick with that one. So I want you to own and love that one, because that's the one that we're going to adopt as your primary belief. The belief that you have that says they are a positive, tell me which one feels good to you. Like French fries are delicious, French fries are cheap, whatever. And they're like, no, French fries are delicious is definitely the one that has the most punch. It's like, okay, that's the one we're going to totally start rejecting. Every time our brain tries to tell us they're delicious, we're going to be like, stop with your deceptive lies. I understand that you're trying to manipulate me right now, and I'm going to own the me that knows that where I'm headed. And actually, it's amazing, but if you can start to reframe and own those things, right, then you can actually have a transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, right, is to go back to what we were talking about earlier, is like we have to constantly change habits, because we're constantly growing and learning and evolving. And so I think what for all of us to continually do is for me, I try to always look at my habits and be like, because some things are good for you for a certain period of time, and then you go to the next level, they're not good for you anymore. Mm-hmm. So just like diets can be good to have a certain diet for a period of time, then you go to some level and it's not working for you anymore. So that's just a practical example. But yeah, to continue looking at our lifestyle patterns and to be constantly noticing if there's a shift that needs to happen or wants to happen, and then be willing to make that shift. I mean, that feels really essential.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like the seed. There's a little shell around a seed, mm-hmm. right? But once it sprouts, it actually has to let go of that shell. That shell mm-hmm. will hold it back, mm-hmm. even though at one point it was the thing that protected it. Mm-hmm. Same is true for our life, right? Like we got to let go of we got to shed that skin. We got to let go of those things. And it's interesting too, doing a lot of the habit work, I learned a very powerful concept, which is that what you stop matters more than what you start. And what's interesting about that is that we live in a start culture that basically start this, start that, start a new diet, start yoga, start coaching, start journaling, start keeping track of your time, start productivity hacking, start, investing in cryptocurrencies. There's a million things to start, but we often don't talk about the stop list. You know what I mean? Like I need to stop this, I need to stop that. That list is generally a lot less of the path that people take. But you think about it this way. If you were to say you wanted to lose weight and I was to talk to you about your diet and we found, well, you eat a pizza every week on Friday nights, you love to have your pizza. And that pizza was worth, call it, 1,500 calories or whatever, right? And then I was talking about your workout, and we figured out that in order for you to burn 1,500 calories, you would essentially need to work out 5 days a week. So which is easier? Is it easier to start working out 5 days a week or to quit eating one pizza a week?
I would say to the quitting.
Yeah, it's a little easier, right? To put down, even though it might not seem, right away, like it's easier to put down that pizza. If I'm like, hey, you're going to get in that gym, you're going to crank out sweat. It's going to cost you money to get a gym membership. You're going to need to get some gym clothes. You're going to need to go in there and work up the willpower every day, or you just quit the pizza. So there's a lot more power in what we stop, but we get a lot of times trapped in what we should start. And we forget, and most of us are already overwhelmed. We do ourselves well by getting rid of, all the things we can. I was just listening to the Philosopher's Note on the Effective Executive, and they were saying, Peter Drucker said, the first things first, second things never.
Nice.
Right? And that would be a good thing for us to all start to adopting. Well, here, I've been talking too much. Let me get back to you. So tell me a little bit more about your fatherhood journey. What were some of the lessons that you learned? There were like big shifts for you. Did you have to correct any of your fathering or get to a place where you were like, let me ask it like this. Were there patterns that you were having to change in your parenting?
I think like the biggest thing for me that I think was really valuable is forming communication with my son from the earliest age. Like even when he didn't understand what I was talking about, I would still be talking to him, figuring something energetic. Kids, even when they're not verbal, they're very sensitive to energy, and they, there's something that they can pick up, right? That they're very aware of. But I would always try to because I think parents do this thing of don't do that, and yell at the kid and why? 'Cause I said so, that's kind of the end of the conversation. So I wanted him to understand why, so he can, there's an understanding there. 'Cause think for me, if I understand why I shouldn't do something, then I'm much more likely not to do it than if I don't understand, So from a very young age, I would try to communicate with him. And, if he'd say, why this, why that, we try to explain it to him. And I think that we developed which is the most essential thing for any relationship is good communication. I think that's the number one thing. And as my son went through the teenage years, he's 20 now. So he just, kind of still a teenager in some ways, but just kind of went through that phase. We maintained good communication. And I think that that's really important. He kind of opened up to me about certain things that maybe another family, a child wouldn't tell their parents.
So he had that psychological safety. Me and past guests talked about that. So he had, which I loved the frame of that, psychological safety, the ability to just be able to come to you and talk to you about things.
That's right.
And so, and so at a young age, you're like, hey, we can't do this, but let me tell you why, and let's explore that.
Yeah. And he would ask me why,
Right.
Now, not in every situation, you don't always have the time. Like if there's some kind of emergency situation, but when there is the time to make that space to so in other words, I'm forming a relationship with him. I'm treating him like what I want him to become, basically, if that makes sense. Someone that can think for themselves and understand things and having him step into that place where we can have that kind of communication together.
That's beautiful. The root of parent is, or the word parent actually means to draw forth, to come forth. Its original meaning was to come forth or to bring forth.
Yeah.
And so you're really trying to help bring that out of him. And so would this look like, just asking curiosity questions whenever you guys were up against a challenge, instead of telling him or directing him or ordering him, you're just like, hey, let me ask you, what do you think here?
I think there's a time, for example, if he runs out when he's small, right? Runs out in the street. No, you can't do that.
Right. So there's a boundary.
There's no conversation. There is a conversation, but it's not the conversation is not, it's here's the way it is, but here's why it is. Yeah. So it doesn't come, so I think what happens I know when I was a child with my father, you'd asked me before we got on about something with my father. So I would say when I was young, the communication wasn't really there in that way. So I just felt like my dad was against me, but from his perspective, he's doing it because he cares about me.
Yeah, he's protecting.
I thought that he was very, what we would call like strict.
Authoritarian?
Yeah. He's like just kind of strict, like a lot of rules and a lot of, just this. So
was he supportive? Was he like high in warmth?
I think that he was supportive, but I didn't see it that way.
Right.
Because I didn't know that that's why he was doing it.
Because he didn't take the time to tell you why. Is it because I said you so?
Exactly. He's thinking that I care about you, so I want you. I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to blah 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 blah. Now maybe if he would have talked to me, maybe he could have seen that his idea wasn't the best idea, and that would happen with my son too. When he would get older, sometimes he was right. Sometimes what I thought was best for him. Once I got more information, I'm like, oh, okay, he has a point. Let's try to modify this and do it this way instead. And
so you were willing to own that with him and not just kind of keep on that path.
Yeah.
Because you said so path.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a fine line, right? Like, because we don't want our children feeling like they can negotiate everything, or if they throw a big enough fit, that will change their mind.
That's a good point. So it's not about throwing. So if he throw a fit, that's actually one of the things. If you throw a fit, no.
It's already over.
It's over.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if we can talk in a conscious way, then there's openings to discuss things and look at things.
Very cool.
I think that's a key point, actually.
Yeah.
Because I see parents that enable that, and that's just, as soon as you start, doing they're throwing a fit, let's just give it to them so they stop. Well, they're okay. You just showed them the strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're going to repeat that pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also something that I've come to find is that children aren't as manipulative as we think they are. Mm-hmm. They just do what works.
Right.
Like, they're not actually sitting there going, okay, today what I'm going to do. And they're not like plotting it out. They just have a thing that happens. Then whenever they get emotional enough, you change it, and then they just repeat it. It's not them trying to become this little manipulator. It's just them doing what works.
Yeah.
And when we get upset, which can be, you don't get your way, it's upsetting sometimes.
Yep,
I tell my son all the time, I said, I love you, and I have confidence that you can handle disappointment. Mm-hmm. Because the truth is that disappointment is a part of life.
Yep.
So, okay. So that was an important thing for you, is just the communication going back. And if you look back, it's like, man, communication was a very important part of our journey, and I'm glad.
And instead of like punishment, I would prefer my son to like learn why that's not the best way to do things, so he doesn't do it again. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the thing. Like, with my upbringing, it was like, you did this, you're punished. But I didn't. But how about if I learn and I don't, then I won't want to do it. If I learn why it's not a good thing to do.
100%.
Right. So that kind of thing. That was a difference for me with parenting with my son.
What are some things that you wish you would have done a little differently? Is there anything in there that you're like, man, if there was one thing?
The only thing that what came up for me a little bit in the beginning of the podcast when I was thinking about that particular period is I would like to have like been more consistently present for some of those periods where there was gaps. Mm-hmm. But again, if I really look at it, I don't know that it could have been done a different way, just because of way his mom was at that time, where I was at that time, and what was happening. So there's this kind of idea of like, to be really consistent. And I feel like the big moments, all the essential moments that I would like to be there, I was there for those. But I think there's something positive about being there, daily. Mm-hmm. That's beneficial for a child.
Mm-hmm. And your father and you, what was that like for you? Like, what was your relationship?
That's interesting, because that was a journey. I really, to be frank, when I was a teenager, which isn't that uncommon, I feel like I really hated my parents, and there was like this rebellion. I couldn't wait to get away from them, and so there was that. And then there was a journey where, as I became an adult, I get along with them really well now. And I think they grew, and I grew, and they learned to, basically, to put it really simple, they learned to accept me for who I am. But I also learned to accept them for who they are, right? And so now we're at a place where, like, they're very different from me. They have a lot of different ways of seeing the world than I do. But I accept them for who they are, and they accept me for who I am. And it's good. It's good. Yeah. I appreciate them.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I want to ask you, we talked about like kind of having this question that I want to ask a lot of guests, but what's fatherhood really mean to you? What has it meant to you?
It's meant a lot. I think I used to always say that, like, I talked about all these different like spiritual teachers and these people, the Indian spiritual teachers and all these different people that I was getting a lot of information from. But I would always say like my greatest spiritual teacher was my son, just being present with him, watching him, especially when he was young, like just the way he would move through the world. And then being a father, I think that's been my greatest spiritual teacher of anything, of any of the books, any of the big names. That's been the greatest spiritual teacher of all.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. Children really are. They're the best tool for self-actualizing. Is how I say it. Yeah,
and it's gonna be challenging, but that's where the growth is.
Yeah.
So if there's a parent listening and they think like, well, I'm not happy, being with my child every single second. Well, you're not supposed to. Like, there's going to be moments where it's challenging, but that's where it's like, I feel like we're teaching the child like just kind of practical stuff for the most part, but they're teaching us things. And those are like the spiritual lessons. Those are the growth lessons that the parent gets. If you're available for the journey and you're up for it. Right. I don't think a lot of parents realize that that's the gift the child has for them. So they're constantly trying to like just squash the child's energy, but the child has, you're going to learn and grow even more so, I feel like, than the child.
Yeah. And it's sick. It's like in this, it's funny. I was reading Principles and he's got this great, Ray Dalio's this great model where he's showing it's almost like this loop. And he says, the transformation is kind of this looping effect where you're going uphill, right? It's challenging. And all of a sudden you hit this plateau where you actually get it. You've gotten the lesson. And then it starts to gain momentum. So you feel like you're actually on this ride where things are going easy. They're going easy. And then you get to a low where all of a sudden you have to go on a regrowth journey again. And it starts the uphill battle all over again. And so there's these cycles, just like a wave would crash, right? Like it's curling up, then it's crashing, and then it's coming back into itself. And actually one of the great coaches I had for parenting early on was told me that children, when they're the most fussy, when you see them feeling the most like rebellious and kind of they're in these funks and you go, he's just in a funk today, or he's really having a hard day today. Those are the moments when they are growing the most. So whether that was actually growth pains, but literally just emotional, mental, that they're growing a lot. And that's those rough patches. And so actually when we see those rough patches, a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding that this is a growth patch for my son. This is actually the best thing. This is a good thing. Even though it feels like an upsetting thing, this is a good moment for him to develop new skills and become bigger than he was.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I just wanted to add to that too, that one of the fascinating things about parenting is like, every couple of years, it's like a totally different job. That's the thing. That's the thing I learned.
Yeah, it's not seasons. It's like even different than that. It's like a whole new life.
Yeah, it's like every couple of years, it's like, as soon as you get it down, then it's a different thing. They're in a different phase of their lives. Now I got to learn this phase. Now I got to learn this phase. So that's the amazing thing about parenting is like it's never like, now I know how to do it, because then they're a different age, and now it's a whole different way of relating with them.
I'm reminded of this great thing I just heard the other day, whereas no one man can stand in a river twice. The river is not the same river, and he is not the same man. Yeah. No one parent can stand in the same parenting experience twice. For your child is not the same child, and you are not the same parent.
They're getting older every day.
This has been a lot of fun, Brian. Thank you so much for being on. I got a quick question for you. Do you have a dad joke for us? And if not, I've got one in the bank for us.
A dad joke. You told me a few funny ones earlier. I like the one about tell him the bison.
Oh yeah, okay. What did the butcher say to the buffalo? Bye, son.
Which is perfect right now.
There you go. Bye, son. Thank you so much, Brian, for being on. This has been a blast.
Thank you, Brendan.
Oh, real quick, really quick. One thing I just forgot. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you and how to get a hold of you?
So I have a website, thebigglow.com, thebigglow, TheBigGlow.com. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on Telegram. Not so much on Facebook, but occasionally still I'm on Facebook. But yeah, the website is probably the best way to reach me. There's a contact option there to reach me directly through there.
Great. And we'll be sure to include that in the description. Yeah. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you've received some value from it, please share it with other dads and consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll see you in the next episode. Looking for support with your fatherhood journey? Go to bedadly.com and take our Dadly Disposition quiz and learn helpful insights on how you can overcome power struggles with your kids.